Children of the Centaur by Lisa Tuttle. This story was published in the September 1984 issue of Amazing Stories magazine. Read by Daryl T. Smith II for my channel Quasar Spectra. Children of the Centaur. The settlement of Dawnlight smelled of dust and feathers. There were awkward flappings and rushing blurs of blue and white as startled birds left their perches, and the pale yellow dirt puffed up in tiny clouds from the roads as hopping, fist-sized creatures made for the shadows. The intruders, 7 people, looked around uneasily at the deserted buildings. The air was heavy with undisturbed silence and sunlight. Bird droppings mottled the walls, changing the too bright colors, making their pinks, blues, and yellows more possibly a part of the landscape. Bird nests and the fragile traps and homes of insects softened the man-made angles. Nature, with the assistance of time, was absorbing the town, altering its alienness. The local creatures had obviously accepted it as part of the landscape, as if it were no more than a tumble of rocks thrown up in some planetary disturbance. "They don't expect the humans back," thought Brill Svoboda. "The birds and the insects know they're gone for good. But where?" He glanced at the others, all frozen like himself on the outer circle of the settlement known as Dawnlight, momentarily reluctant to penetrate deeper, afraid of what they might find. Chandra Tibbus, leader of the expedition, caught Brill's wandering eye and spoke to the group. Her voice, clear, deep, and resonant, broke the momentary spell which had held them. "The floater probes found nothing," she said. "That doesn't mean there was nothing to find, although indications are that Dawnlight is empty of everything but these frightened birds and harmless insects. Truly, we don't know what we may find inside. We must all be on our guard, remembering that this is a strange, possibly very dangerous place. Something happened to the first settlers, after all. We want to find out what happened, but we don't want to fall victim to it ourselves. Be careful, take all precautions." She hesitated, staring thoughtfully at 2 figures, a woman and a girl. By the way they stood, it was obvious that they did not consider themselves a natural part of the group. "Sulea," said Chandra, speaking to the woman, "if you and Dara would like to wait—" But she had said the same thing back at the ship, where waiting might have been sensible, and they had refused. "We're coming," said Sulea in a colorless tone, just as she had said the first time. Chandra sighed and caught Brill's eye. He gave her back an almost imperceptible nod. Yes, he would keep a sharp lookout for those 2 unpredictable members of the group. "Let's go," said Chandra, and she turned and led the way. Dawnlight had been built on a treeless plateau about 2 kilometers from the calm, golden-brown ocean. To the north was forest. East and south stretched flat, grassy plains the colonists would eventually have turned to use as farmland. But the colonists had not stayed long enough for that. The settlers had built their town of synthetic materials. The houses were small and similar in design, prefabricated to be thrown up in a day. They were in pastel shades of pink, yellow, and blue. The birds and other small animals living in Dawnlight now had left more of a mark upon the bland sameness of the town than had the lost colonists. As Chandra led the others deeper into the rows of small buildings, the streets spiraled out from a central plaza, they all began subtly to relax. There were no bodies here, no signs of bloodshed, no lurking enemies, no obvious danger. From the looks of the quiet, tidy houses, everyone had simply walked out one day, never to return. Over 450 people had been on the first colonial expedition to the planet known as Bright Angel. Where had all those men, women, and children gone? Brill noticed that Solea and Dara were hanging back from the others, and he too fell back to watch them. After a few minutes, they began walking in decidedly the opposite direction from the rest of the group. Solea, Avran's daughter, and Dara, her Pathic child, intrigued Brill. Throughout the long space voyage to Bright Angel, he had made repeated attempts to get to know them, attempts that were forever frustrated or simply ignored. They did not belong on this expedition at all. It was in compassion for Solea and admiration for her famous mother that Chandra Tibbus had allowed the pair to join the expedition. Solea was the daughter of Avran Rhys, a nearly legendary explorer, and most recently a member of the Dawnlight colony. She had been the first to explore Bright Angel and knew more about the planet than any other human. Yet Solea knew no more about Bright Angel than anyone else. Still, Brill could understand Chandra's decision. What he could not understand was why Solea had wanted to come. Solea and Dara were joined together in total empathic contact. Together they were one unit, self-contained and aloof from the rest of the world. Brill knew what pathic sharing was, and he could not understand what had brought Solea and Dara to Bright Angel when the only world they cared about was encompassed in the circle of their joined minds. Brill made no attempt to hide himself or stay out of hearing as he followed, but the two figures ahead never turned to look back and seemed totally unaware of his presence. They approached a small blue house with the name Avran Rhys picked out in chips of pink stone to the left of the door. Flapping wildly, alarmed by their approach, a large white bird flew out of the window. Solea turned, watching the bird, and saw Brill. Her face tightened. "Why do you follow me around?" Dara turned now and also watched Brill. She had her mother's brown eyes, but in her face they appeared flat and inscrutable. They did not shine as her mother's did. Brill had never seen her reveal emotion. He looked back at Solea. "We're supposed to stay together," he said. "It could prove dangerous, especially to a pair as inexperienced as yourselves. When you agreed to come on this expedition, you agreed to follow the rules. We don't know what happened to the Dawnlight colonists, and we can't afford to take foolish risks, like going off alone. But why should you follow me? I noticed you slipping away. Besides, I didn't notice any of your other friends rushing forward to go with you." To his surprise, she flushed at the feeble sarcasm. "You always follow me," she muttered, "even on the ship." "I didn't realize it bothered you so," he said. "I'm sorry, but I was curious to get to know you. And on such a small ship with so few people, well, someone new was a novelty, a relief. I thought you might get the same pleasure talking to me. The others didn't think I was such a novelty. I suppose you make most of the others uncomfortable. It's the same for me," she said. "Dara and I do fine on our own. Trying to know other people is pointless, silly, shallow. After knowing Dara, the struggle doesn't seem worth the effort," Brill said. "You can think that as long as you have Dara, but if you were to find yourself alone again, like other people, it's a waste of time talking to you." Brill watched as she turned away from him. He was tense with the need to talk to her, to spill out the words, long unsaid, that no one else could possibly understand. But Solea might be able to understand if she would listen to him, but not now. He made himself relax and followed her inside her mother's house. Solea looked around uncertainly, almost reverently, thought Brill, as if she had found herself in a church. Why, if she cared so little about other people, had she come all this way in search of her mother? Dara had seated herself on a low bench beneath the back window and was blankly staring out, apparently indifferent to her surroundings. Brill noticed a similar and very welcome piece of furniture, the computer terminal. He went to it and punched up the index, staring into the blank green sea of the screen as he waited for the results. Most of the listings in the index were, as expected, the usual core library of science, history, literature, music, medicine, and so on. More interesting to him were listings for entries dealing with life in Bright Angel's first colony, including the official daily log. If it did not hold the answer, the log would surely provide some clues. Brill called it up. No information for that call number. Brill stared at the words in disbelief, then tried again, using a slightly different command. The white words flashed on the screen again. So, someone had wiped out the log. That same someone, as Brill quickly discovered, had also eradicated all other entries pertaining to life on Bright Angel. Anything that might have held the slightest clue was gone. Chewing viciously at his lower lip, Brill turned away from the console and saw Sulea holding something small in her hands and gazing down at it with great attention. "Find something?" He crossed the floor as he spoke and intercepted her half-conscious movement to put the object behind her. "Ha-ah," he said, catching hold of it. "We share." He looked down at what he held. Within the holographic cube, a young girl looked pensive, then smiled, then danced in a frilly white petticoat. Had the girl not looked so alive, happy, and normal, Brill might have thought it a miniature Abdara. "You?" Sulea nodded sullenly. He held it out to her. "I'm sorry. I was rude. But I just found out that somebody got to the computer before us, wiped out all memory of anything the colonists might have written which could have helped us. And then when you looked as if you were hiding something, well, after all, we're not here to play games, but to find the answer to a mystery." She stared at the cube in his hand, not reaching out to take it. "May I keep it, or is it important evidence? I did say I was sorry." She took the cube and looked at him scornfully. "I came here to find my mother. I'm not so stupid that I'll hide anything that might help us find her. I don't understand." She looked at him remotely. "No, of course you don't." Tents blossomed in the meadow below dawnlight. Brill and Chandra shared one tent, Sulea and Dara another. Langui, Beck, Andia M2, and Gavrilo Setsu each had their own tents. So much space and open air were luxuries after the long, enclosed voyage. The first meal after landing was a group feast, happy and noisy in the middle of all the tents. Only Sulea and Dara did not join. Just as on the ship, they remained apart, making their separateness from the rest of the party a physical boundary whenever they could. Brill looked at their tent, the gray walls all snugly tied down, and wondered what they thought inside. Were they contemptuous of the empty talk and loud laughter from without? Such crude, imperfect methods of communication, he thought. Inside were two who knew each other so intimately that they might not even be able to tell their thoughts apart. But what need to differentiate? Brill felt lonely, lonelier than he had felt in years. Chandra slipped her arm around him and pulled him a little way from the table. "What's wrong, sweet?" He hugged her, as shakily grateful for her presence as if she had pulled him back from a dangerous edge. "Let's go somewhere we can talk," she said. Brill glanced around at the others. Andia, the ex-soldier, was getting drunk and singing a bawdy song. Langui Beck was chuckling to himself about something, while young Gavrilo was eating his meal as earnestly as he did everything else. "Let's go in," he said. As they walked back to their tent, Chandra said, "I'll be glad when the floaters come in tomorrow, and we can get to work on clearing this up. You think it will be that simple? Something the floaters will show?" She looked at him calmly. I think the floaters may well find our missing colonists for us. Whether or not they'll be in any condition to explain what has happened to them, why the town was abandoned and all communications with the outside cut off, I don't know. But there may be a logical explanation, one we can understand. There very frequently is. They entered the tent. You think they all walked away? Well, there are no bodies, no signs of struggle, the erased memory banks. I think somebody walked away. Whether it was disease, madness, mass murder. She smiled and stretched out luxuriously on the pillowed floor. It will be fun to find out. I'm glad we're here at last. Brill stood looking down at her, thinking disjointedly of the years they had spent together, of her strength, her courage, her beauty. She was a long, lean, mahogany-colored woman with short, tightly curling hair. She cocked her head. Why so sad? I'm just thinking. 8 years. And it makes you sad? He shook his head, smiling a little. Shall I make us some tea? Please. The green tea? Brill busied himself with a pot, tea and water, aware that Chandra was still watching him closely. She said at last, I'm happy. Can't help but be. That we're here at last. A new world makes me excited. I feel alive. It's your life? Brill said. You're a wanderer. But you, Brill, what about you? Why do you go on wandering? Is it for love of the life or for love of me? A bit of both, he said. In earlier days he had found his love for Chandra and love for travel inextricably bound. He had no more thought for wanting to stop exploring than he had to stop loving Chandra. But lately... Someday, said Chandra, you'll want to stop traveling and find your home. Brill poured out 2 steaming cups of tea. Someday perhaps I will too, Chandra added, her voice wistful. You think so? If I find what I'm looking for, isn't that what wanderers are? People who've never found their home? Brill smiled. You think all this time you've been looking for the perfect place to settle down? It's possible. After all, Avron Reese gave up traveling after exploring Bright Angel. She joined the first colony. Brill handed her a cup of tea and settled himself carefully onto the cushions beside her, holding up his fragrantly steaming cup so that it would not spill. One of the greatest explorers of our time, Chandra said. Avron Reese. I never met her. I hope we find her so I can ask her, face to face, why she chose Bright Angel. Was it to be her permanent home, or was it only a rest? Can a wanderer ever lose her restlessness? She blew on her tea to cool it and glanced sideways at Brill. It was only for her sake that I let Suleya and her child come along. I set aside all my reservations, my better judgment, agreed to put up with that stone-faced brat of hers, all because my hero, Avron Reese, by some accident of nature, happened to have mothered her. But she might know something her mother told her. Chandra shook her head, smiling wryly. She doesn't. It was sentiment, pure sentiment on my part. There was no other reason. She sighed. Except that I drank too much at dinner that night, excited by the mission. She sipped her tea, made a face. Brill stared down at the shining circle of his tea. He thought of Suleya with her daughter, the 2 of them in their tent, curled together on the sleeping pad like twins in the womb, like the 2 halves of one brain. Do you know who she reminds me of? He asked. Your sister. Surprised, Brill looked up quickly and caught, or thought he did, a vague hint of uneasiness in her face. How did you know? Brill, really? She smiled, shaking her head reprovingly. You just mentioned that we'd been together 8 years. In that time, I've come to know you well. I know about your sister and how much she meant to you, know as well as I can, since all I know is what you've told me, all these years after the fact. Of course, the relationship between Sulea and Dara would bring to mind your relationship with your sister. You've told me what it was like when your sister discovered there were others like herself and left you to be with them, how your whole life was torn apart. Of course I know, Brill. For years, I thought she would come back to me, Brill said. For years, and then all the years spent hopelessly trying to find someone else with whom I could be. Well, as I had been with my sister. What do you suppose Solea will do? Chandra asked softly. How will she take it when her daughter grows up and leaves her? Brill sipped the slightly bitter tea. Perhaps Dara won't. After all, they're mother and daughter. She learned about the world from Solea even before she was born into it. She might take separation as hard as Solea would. Solea, after all, has lived alone. Dara has never existed without Solea's consciousness enveloping hers. He paused and sipped his tea again. But if Dara does leave her, I know what it will be like for Solea. I know just what it will be like. It was much later, and Brill had left Chandra sleeping and gone outside the tent when he heard the scream. He shot one glance at the guard, which was registering the scream, but no other disturbance. The scream had come from Sulea's tent, and Brill ran there, knowing that the guard would soon alert the others. Sulea was sitting up in bed, hugging her sleepy daughter close. What happened? Sulea's pale face darkened in the moonlight. Nothing. I had a dream. A nightmare, that's all. Dara stirred sleepily in her mother's grasp and yawned. She seemed as unconcerned as ever, which Brill found curious. Surely mother and daughter had shared the same nightmare. If so, why had only one of them found it frightening enough to scream and wake up? Does this often happen? No. Just let us go back to sleep. I'm sorry if we... What's going on? Chandra came into the tent. Brill? Sulea had a nightmare, Brill said, still watching the figures on the bed. Nothing to worry about, she says. I'll tell the others. Brill? She touched his arm, and he turned to look at her. You won't be too long? He put his hand on top of hers. No, I was just taking a walk to tire myself. I'll be in soon. He watched her leave and turned back to Sulea. I could give you a sleeping pill, he said. I'll be fine. You seem upset still, Brill said. I don't think you'll find it easy to fall asleep. It might help if you talked about it. Sulea glanced down at Dara, now asleep in her arms. The nightmare that Dara didn't share? Oh, but she... Sulea bit her lip and settled her daughter back on the bed. Come for a walk with me, Brill said. The sky is lovely. The moons are bright. Talking about it might help. At last she nodded, still not meeting his eyes, stood up, and pulled on a robe. They left the tent together. Eerie in the darkness and the silence, a big white bird flew past, close to the ground. Brill felt Sulea move closer to him, and he had to stop himself, remembering the way she had retreated from him and from others in the past, from putting his arm around her. What was the nightmare about? He asked abruptly. Dara leaving you? She drew in a breath sharply. No, I don't expect you to understand. I understand very well. In the dream, Dara and I were standing on a large, flat, yellow plain. It was here on Bright Angel. We both were dreaming this. We always dream together. We saw some figures in the distance, traveling in our direction, and at the sight we were both filled with excitement and a strong sense of eager anticipation. Although the creatures were too far away to be seen clearly, we knew what they were. They were centaurs, the creatures my mother found so fascinating about Bright Angel. You've probably read of them or seen pictures? Into his mind came a brief visual memory of a herd of large four-footed animals which looked more like dinosaurs than any sort of horses. He also vaguely remembered some uncharacteristically odd-sounding description from the early reports made by Avron Reese. "I've seen stills," he said. "I don't understand why she called them centaurs." "From Greek mythology," she said blankly. Brill smiled. "I know the word, but I didn't see much resemblance to the half-horse, half-men of legend in those creatures." "It was their faces," Sulea said, her voice suddenly sounding drained. "If you had seen their faces—" "As you did, in the dream," Brill prompted when her voice trailed off. "Yes, they came pounding up to us, their broad, flat feet crushing the vegetation, their hot breath boiling the air around us, their scent making our heads reel, and they looked at us. Their faces were like the faces of stone gods, calm, beautiful, terrifying. The more terrifying because they grew out of those crushingly huge elephantine bodies, the brute strength, the unnatural, cool wisdom in their eyes. I was afraid. So very afraid. I knew they could destroy us." "But Dara? In our dream, Dara walked toward them, her arms outstretched, and she was smiling. She welcomed them. She was happier than she had ever been in her life. I screamed. I tried to warn her, to tell her they would hurt her, but she didn't understand. For the first time in our lives together, she didn't understand. She thought they were to be loved, not feared. It was as if she could not hear me. I screamed. I couldn't hold her back. I screamed, and I woke up." They had walked too far from camp. Brill could see the guard flashing a fretful warning light. He caught Sulea's arm to turn her back. She did not pull away, so he left his hand resting lightly on her arm as they began to walk back together. "Dara did not share this dream?" "What? No, of course she did. I told you we always dream together. Our minds are together. For us to have separate dreams would be like one mind carrying on with two dreams at the same time." "But Dara wasn't frightened," Brill said. "When I found the two of you—" "Dara wasn't frightened," Sulea agreed. "That's what frightens me so. It wasn't the dream itself, but the fact that for the first time Dara and I were not thinking and feeling as one. For the first time— Oh, you can't know what that's like." Brill grimaced and gripped her arm more tightly. "It was the same dream. It should have been the same for both of us, but to Dara, the centaurs were something wonderful, something that evoked love and awe rather than terror. And I couldn't make Dara understand how I felt, how she should have felt. So it wasn't the centaurs that frightened you, but the idea that you and Dara might think and feel differently. That was your nightmare, your fear that Dara is growing away from you. The centaurs were just a pretext. Anything might have happened in the dream to communicate the same message, that Dara is growing up, and you can't expect your closeness to last forever." "No!" She pulled away from him in anger, then relaxed. "I'm sorry, Brill, but you don't know what you're talking about. Dara and I aren't just an ordinary mother and daughter. We're so close we might as well be one person." "That's where you're wrong," Brill said. "You are two people, and to think that you're one will only make things harder, prolong the agony for you when the time for separation comes." "Why are you saying this? I know my daughter. You don't. I know my daughter as well as I know myself. Because—" "Look," Brill said, "I'm not pathic myself any more than you are on your own, but I had a sister once, and for many years we were linked as closely as you and your daughter are, until she started growing up a little, until she started reaching out restlessly and learned that there were others like herself who had a lot more to offer her than her pathetic, clinging leech of a brother. And so she left me. As I know, your daughter will someday leave you. And you know it too, or you wouldn't have nightmares about it." "I'm sorry for you," Suleya said, her voice cool and distant again. "I'm sorry you lost your sister, but Dara and I are different. Dara could no more exist without me than I could return to an existence without her. Good night." Brill watched her walk away from him in the bright moonlight. It took a great effort to turn and walk towards his own tent. Suddenly he felt almost too tired to move another step. He thought of Suleya getting into bed beside her sleeping daughter, thought of Suleya hugging her, perhaps crying over her, with a depth of emotion Dara would never be able to understand. In time, Dara would leave Suleya behind, bodily and mentally, as she had once left her womb for a wider world. All of Suleya's love would be useless. It would end in pain and isolation. It would tear her apart. It was as useless as his own love. He entered the tent and wearily undressed himself. "Suleya," he thought, feeling hopeless. "Suleya." He lay down beside Chandra, who stirred in her sleep and then sighed when he kissed her lightly. "Suleya, Suleya." Useless. "Damn you, Dara, and damn you too, long-dead sister of mine. Suleya, can't you feel my love? Can't you hear my thoughts?" Rising slowly out of sleep, Brill was dimly aware that Chandra's warmth had left the bed, and that there were voices outside the tent. "Brill, wake up! A herd of centaurs heading this way!" He sat up at once and reached for his clothes. "What? Where?" "Gavrilo spotted them. They're still pretty far away, but they're moving in our direction at a good rate of speed. Shouldn't take them very long to reach us. Of course, we don't actually know if they know we're here. They could be coming in this direction for some other reason. But I think, considering that Avron Rees mentioned that they seem to show up in order to examine her group, showing no signs of fear and very little curiosity in our presence," Brill said, quoting the first report on Bright Angel. "Do you suppose it could be the same herd?" Brill shrugged. "I wouldn't want to guess. I'm anxious to see them. I'm curious to see why they impressed Avron Rees so." They went outside together. The air was close and musty smelling, and the light had a lowering yellowish cast. "Dust," said Chandra. "That wind that swept through here just before dawn was heavy with it." She sneezed twice, abruptly, and rubbed her nose, making a wry face. Brill looked toward the rising sun, a halo of bronze light in the eastern sky. "Where are they?" "There, to the north, that dark brown blur against the sky." It was young Gavrilo Setsu, humbly offering his discovery. This was his second expedition. He could scarcely sleep at night for his determination not to miss a thing. Brill squinted and stared into the northern sky. He could barely make out a moving brownish line. "We could see them clearly with the glasses," Chandra said. "Yes," Brill agreed. He noticed that the tents had all emptied now, everyone out to see the distant centaurs, even Suleya and Dara. No one moved to go back for glasses. The creatures were traveling fast. Soon it was possible to distinguish individual elephantine bodies, to see the round, incongruously small heads bobbing slightly at the end of long, slender necks held precariously erect. They moved in an oddly graceful canter, without apparent strain despite their bulk. In a moment, thought Brill, we shall see their faces. He was gripped by anticipation so intense it was close to terror. Soon he would be in their presence. He both feared and desired that. It passed through them all like a wave. Without a word spoken, the waiting people began to walk slowly away from the encampment, out onto the open plain to meet the arrival of the centaurs. They were suddenly surrounded by the wall of gray flesh and the overwhelming scent of them, rich and strange and powerful. Brill thought the pounding of his heart would surely kill him. For a moment he was blinded by his tears. "Oh, who are you? What are you?" Huge, gray bodies supported by 4 powerful legs and a huge, curving tail, the arch of a long, sinuous neck, skin hairless, rough and pebbled in texture, feet large and padded. Animals. But that was not all. Their heads, their faces. Oh, what are you? The faces of gods. Human, yet inhuman. Their round heads should have seemed ridiculous as the termination of those immense, powerful bodies and long necks, but they did not. Brill stared helplessly, caught by the large, strangely glowing eyes. Not human, those powerful jaws filled with the square teeth of a ruminant. Not human, the long, flat nose, and the gray-green eyes with the silver light shining with an awesome look of wisdom. Not human either, but more than human. The centaurs had round, flat ears and thin-lipped mouths. Those mouths were curved into a strange half-smile as they stood and quietly observed the humans. It was a disturbing expression. The sight of the smile stirred some deep-buried memory, some long-forgotten dream in Brill's mind. "What are you?" He spoke aloud at last, voicing the question that tore at him. His voice quavered, and he wanted to hide his face, yet he could not stop looking. The centaurs made no sound. They did not move. They smiled that awesome smile and gazed at the humans with their strange eyes. Brill felt enveloped by a thick, enshrouding mystery, frightened and half-drugged by it. He wanted to clear it away, to name these creatures, name this feeling they woke in him, give a word to what they meant. If he could say the word, speak the name, the mists would part and doors open. Everything would change. It only awaited his speaking. He panted through his mouth, trying not to smell them, hoping to clear his head somehow. He shut his eyes, but those glowing, terrifying eyes were still there, behind his lids. Brill cried out, opening his eyes, and stared around wildly. The centaurs were moving away, slowly lifting and lowering their huge legs deliberately, their heads lifted high again. The herd of centaurs was leaving. The spell partially broken, at last able to notice the others, Brill saw Sulea hugging Dara. Dara was oblivious to her mother, staring after the departing centaurs, her body straining and her eyes alive as they had never been before. Sulea held her tightly, but Dara might have been made of mist. Brill ran to them, his body bent and twisting with sudden pain. He threw his arms around Sulea, who still embraced Dara, and cried out in his grief, Tell me who they are!" He was weeping uncontrollably, and Sulea shook like a grass in the wind within his arms. Only Dara, at the center of the embrace, was calm, and her calm had a new quality now. She glowed as if a fire had just been lit in the cold, dark room of her soul. They were all like invalids, miraculous survivors of some long illness, still shaky from the fever, bewildered and a bit ashamed of the wild dreams the fever had brought. Even Sulea and Dara stayed with the company for the breakfast they all, with no appetite, made pretense of eating. They sat around the table in the center of camp and tried to explain to themselves what had happened. "It was the faces," said Langui Beck, a seasoned explorer. "Those almost human heads on such bodies. It shocks our expectations, as people were once shocked by wild apes. No matter how rational we are, it's a shock to see what we think of as human set atop what we think of as animal. I remember, not from personal experience, mind you, as I was just a child at the time, when contact was first made with the Bir-Ungrians. People had a hard time, a very hard time, coming to grips with the understanding that these creatures were a lot closer to us mentally than to the bugs they resembled. Culture shock, Chandra interrupted. I see what you're saying, but Lang, we have no proof that these creatures are intelligent, and even if they are a little strange-looking, why should we be so much more shaken by these creatures than we were by meeting up with the Arak ghost cows? You were on that expedition with me. You remember what they were like. Chandra and Langui exchanged reminiscent smiles, and Langui began, I'm also reminded of the time. The Centaurs are intelligent, said Gavrilo. He leaned across the table, trying for Chandra's attention, earnest and intent. They must be. We recognized something within them that is greater than ourselves, something more than mere intelligence, something awesome. That's what we felt. It's that simple. Not as simple as you, Gavrilo Setsu, said Andya with a sneer. She laughed abruptly, and Brill tensed, fearing a fight. You'll be talking about our immortal souls next, you little... Andya, Chandra said sharply, we're not in the service here. She turned her attention to Gavrilo. All you're saying, Gavrilo, is an expression of what we all felt. We know how we all reacted to the Centaurs. We want to find out why. There is no other reason than that we recognize them for what they are and reacted, Gavrilo said. Why shouldn't it be that simple? I'm reminded of the hell kites of the Lydian army, Andya said. Very small flying creatures which release a vapor which induces the sensations of fear in any warm-blooded creature it falls on. Since we all felt fear and awe, perhaps this indicates that the Centaurs were secreting something, some defensive chemical weapon to protect them from any who might mean them harm. A nice theory, Chandra said. I'm familiar with the hell kites, but Andya, why would a creature like the Centaur, living in a world without enemies, have evolved such a weapon? Perhaps it has some other intentions, Andya said. A sexual hormone, perhaps, but our alien bodies react to it in a different way. Or perhaps there were once predators here, now extinct. I don't like that, Gavrilo said, and I don't believe it. I know what I felt. She looked at him contemptuously. No, of course you don't like it. You wouldn't like the Lydian hellkites either, but they exist, whether or not you believe in them. You like to believe in gods and strange forces and the soul. You like to think your soul is responsible for whatever you feel. You can't bear the idea that complicated chemical reactions could be responsible for your feelings, no matter how you want to intellectualize it. Andya, please, Chandra said wearily. Your idea does have merit. If it is a chemical reaction, perhaps we can protect ourselves against it by covering all our bare skin and breathing bottled air when they come near. Why must we worry about protecting ourselves? Gavrilo demanded. We reacted to them as if they had been gods. Perhaps they are. And if they are gods, then how can we protect ourselves from them? And why should we try? Something made Brill look at Dara just then, and he felt a prickling sensation down his back. She was smiling, and the smile on her face, before always so bland and blank, was the eerie, knowing half-smile of the Centaurs, that same archaic smile sometimes found on the carved or sculpted heads of long-forgotten gods on Earth. The floater reports came in a few hours later, and everyone gathered in Chandra's tent, eager to learn whatever might be revealed when she ran a quick computer analysis on the mass of information. They gazed at a film which showed a herd of centaurs traveling slowly, pausing often in groves of trees to graze or simply to stand about. Brill waited uneasily for some recurrence of the sensations the presence of the centaurs had roused, but they did not come. It apparently was not something transmitted by a camera. Chandra caught her breath, and there was a rustling as everyone craned closer to the screen. There, following the centaurs at a little distance, was another herd, and this herd was human. The Dawnlight survivors, thin, dirty, and with a wild look about them. There were perhaps 20 of them, 20 out of 450. What had happened to them? Brill wondered, feeling a profound unease as he watched the small, shambling group trailing in the wake of the indifferent centaurs. What had brought them to this? He wished the floaters had brought back, instead of this, films of hundreds of bloated purple corpses swarming with some easily isolated alien bacteria. Then there would be an easy answer. But what was the answer to this? Chandra broke the dismayed, almost fearful silence as they all gazed into the screen. "We know where they are now, at least where some of them are. We'll go to them just as soon as we get the hovercar assembled, and we'll ask them for the answer to our mystery." Brill turned, wanting to disagree with Chandra's too easy assumption that the answer was at hand, when he caught sight of Suleya and remained silent, not knowing what to say. Suleya had grown very pale, and she looked miserable and afraid. Dara was nowhere in sight, but in his mind's eye, Brill once again saw her smiling, the centaur's smile. They had been traveling for several hours when Andya called out in her clear, neutral voice, "Party of survivors sighted, 1.5 kilometers beyond the herd of centaurs, ahead and to the left." Brill pressed against a window to see, close between Gavrilo and Chandra. Neither humans nor centaurs gave any sign of noticing the vehicle approaching them so swiftly. What was wrong with them? Brill wondered. What made them leave dawnlight and a plentiful supply of food to wander through a strange world until the clothes fell off their starving bodies in filthy rags? The car settled to a stop and Andya cut off the engine. Chandra reached across to squeeze Brill's hand quickly, and then the door was sliding open. "Stay together and be on guard," Chandra cautioned. "There's the chance they may turn on us." Perhaps 1/2 kilometer away from the car, clearly visible on the flat open plain, were the humans, still slowly straggling after the centaurs. The members of the expedition now began to follow, in turn, after the dawnlight survivors. But those bedraggled beings did not seem aware that they were being followed. When Chandra called out to them, again and again, not one of them turned. Not one of them faltered or paused to listen. Walking as briskly as they were, it did not take Chandra's group long to catch up with the people they were following. Chandra caught hold of one of the shamblers by the arm, stopping him. Brill felt his heart lurch unpleasantly as Chandra pulled the young man around so they all could see his face. The youth was filthy and emaciated, as they all were, and could have been aged anywhere from about 14 to 20. "Hello," said Chandra urgently. "Can you speak? Do you hear me?" He stared at her, seemingly through her, with dull, vacant eyes. He swayed slightly, and only Chandra's firm hold kept him from continuing to walk after the others. Chandra waved her free hand in front of his eyes, snapped her fingers. He didn't blink. "Is he blind and deaf?" Chandra asked. "Brill, what's wrong with him?" "The same thing that's wrong with them all," Brill said helplessly. "Zombies," said Andya, looking around in disgust. They did seem to be animated corpses, thought Brill. What drove them? What kept them going? Can you speak? Chandra persisted. When he still did not respond, she let go of him, and he shambled off after the rest of his company. Chandra now caught hold of a woman and peered into her face. "Do you know her?" asked Brill uneasily. No. Soleil, come here. Is this your mother?" Brill stared at the woman Chandra had detained. She, too, was emaciated, and her facial features were sunk in dirt and wrinkles. Her body sagged without will in Chandra's hands. Soleil looked uneasily at the woman, unwilling to move closer. No, it can't be. She would hardly be recognizable to anyone in that condition, Brill said. Half-starved, filthy, entranced. "Avron," said Chandra. "Avron Reese. Avron, do you hear me? I don't want you to be Avron Reese. I wouldn't wish such a fate as this on my hero, but if you are, answer me. If you are not, then tell me. Do you hear me?" She shook the woman, who flopped in her grasp like a huge stuffed doll. "Brill, can't you examine her? Tell us what's wrong with her, with all of them." Chandra was looking to him for help. All of them expected him to find the answer. It should have been a challenge. It was the sort of thing that once would have invigorated him, but not now, in the midst of all these zombies, with the heavy odor of the centaurs carried on the wind. His stomach was churning, his heart pounding. We're being infected. We'll sicken and become as they are. We must get away before it is too late for all of us. "I can't possibly. Without some tests, at least," Brill said, uncertainly. "Well, test her," Andia said, tapping the arm of the woman Chandra still held. "They're not putting up any protest. Why shouldn't we take her back to the ship for testing? You can do some preliminary tests in the hovercar, can't you, Brill? We don't need to go all the way back to the ship just yet," said Chandra. "Yes," Brill said dully. He wanted to object, to refuse. He didn't want to be near this creature, near any of them. He would become infected. They all would. "Brill?" He realized, being irrational. Certainly it was a risk, but it was the sort of risk that had to be taken. They couldn't run away. "Sure," he said. "Let's go." Chandra and Brill took the woman back to the hovercar, leaving the others to follow the Dawnlight survivors. Brill ran a series of tests on the unresponsive woman, while Chandra sat at the computer terminal and tried to work out just which of the colonists this one was. "She's suffering from malnutrition," Brill said at length. "Obviously. And she's developed scurvy and a thriving colony of body lice. Her EEG shows that she's in a trance state. She's neither blind nor deaf. She's just selectively tuning us out. I can't tell if the trance is self-induced or caused by something else. There's nothing that I can point to and say, there, that little bug is the culprit responsible. Kill it, and she'll be back to normal in no time. I just don't know why she's not eating properly, why she's wandering around in a daze, unable to take care of herself." Chandra nodded thoughtfully and turned back to the computer. "You know, I think she may be—" Brill lost track of what she was saying. He stared at the woman slumped on the padded seat before him, fighting the deep disgust the sight of her aroused in him. Her feet still twitched, as if she were trying to walk but could not find the ground, and every once in a while she would lurch forward and try to stand up. Each time Brill had caught her and pushed her gently back. Just then she lurched forward again. He caught her, and as his fingers closed on her shoulders, he had a sudden urge to catch hold of her throat instead, to catch hold of that mass of wrinkled flesh and squeeze. He knew she wouldn't struggle. Squeeze until he squeezed the life out of her. an end to her contamination, to this life that was no longer living, to this abomination. He had strong hands, and she was weak and oblivious to him. It would not be difficult. "Brill!" The old woman flopped back on the seat. Her breathing was harsh and labored. Brill broke out into a heavy sweat. He had very nearly killed a fellow human. "Brill, He looked down at his hands and shuddered. "I don't know what happened. All I could think of was the need to destroy her before she destroys us. We have to fight it." Chandra moved beside him and put an arm across his shoulders. "I feel it too. I understand, but we can't let it get the best of us. It's a hard thing to fight. A sensation, not something logical. I know, Brill, but there's no rational reason for this feeling. She's an old woman, dying. She poses no threat. She very well may pose a threat," Brill said. "A serious one. If she is diseased, if she carries the germs of whatever wiped out Dawnlight and made the survivors like this, then she may have already contaminated us. We may not have much time before we're like her." "I've thought of that," Chandra said quietly. "Thought of wiping them all out and leaving this place just as fast as we can. But that's not a rational response, Brill. You found no organism you could identify as causing this disease. Have you thought that perhaps what destroyed Dawnlight was not a physical organism, but simply what we are feeling? These survivors feel, perhaps, an exaggerated version of the awe the presence of the Centaurs made us feel. Perhaps they gave in to it, and that's why they trail after the Centaurs. While those who did not give in to it may have felt just what you have described as feeling towards this old woman, they may have been possessed by disgust, fear, and a murderous hatred. Perhaps they killed each other off. But why?" Chandra shrugged helplessly. "I don't know. But I know what I felt, what we all felt, and that's real enough, no matter how irrational it may have been." The old woman lurched forward, onto her feet again. This time they made no move to stop her, but watched in silence as she made her stumbling way out of the hovercar. "Back to following the Centaurs," Brill said. "We've got to get out of here, Chandra, before it starts happening to us. We don't belong here. We've got to leave right away, Chandra. Brill, we've got a job to do. We can't give in to our fears and feelings." "What job? We've seen what happened to the Dawnlight colonists, and I think we realize that there's a strong chance the same thing will happen to us if we don't get out of here fast. The longer we stay, the greater the possibility that we'll end our lives as shambling, mindless creatures, unable to care for ourselves." Chandra bit her lip. "Soon, Brill, but not right away. We have to find out, as best we can, what happened to all of the Dawnlight colonists, not just this little remnant. We came here to find an answer, and we're not leaving with part of one. Just be strong. We've been in dangerous spots before. You know this is different, Chandra, and if we stay too long, I know, Brill. But we don't even know how long too long is. That's the danger," said Brill. The Dawnlight survivors, followed by their would-be rescuers, finally caught up with the Centaurs in a grove of fruit trees. The day's journey ended. The Centaurs feasted on round green leaves and slightly unripe fruits. Their human followers also pulled the fruit from the trees and scratched wearily in the ground for edible roots. Watching this from a short distance away, Brill felt torn apart by his emotions. Conflicting with his fear and disgust as he watched the zombie-like humans was a great longing, a worshipful awe for the Centaurs. It took a great effort of will to keep distance between himself and the Centaurs, for he wanted to be close to them, to see those noble faces close, to feel the heat of their bodies against his own skin. Brill trembled and closed his eyes, afraid that the sight of the centaurs would draw him, against his will, out of himself. To fight this feeling, he concentrated on the fear and on the disgust and hatred he felt for the wretched humans who had surrendered their will and gone to live among the indifferent centaurs. "We may as well turn in for the night," said Chandra. Her voice was very queer. Brill opened his eyes to look at her and saw with a shock that there were tears in her eyes and running down her face. He turned his back on the grove and put his arm around Chandra. The small group walked back towards the hover car, moving slowly, as someone deeply tired or deathly ill might turn towards the waiting bed. They were all subdued that night as they ate their small supper and made ready for bed in the hover car. Brill knew, without need for telepathic contact, that they all shared the same feelings. It was something they were all struggling with, together, yet alone, and no one wanted to talk about it. When they turned in, Brill lay awake for a long time in the dark. Although the self-contained environment of the hovercar closed out all sight, scent, and sound of the centaurs, he was very much aware of their presence, less than a kilometer away. He wondered if they ever slept. Did they close their lustrous eyes, or stand keeping watch all night? Did they kneel, sit, or stand in the darkness outside? The longing to see and know for himself was nearly unbearable. "If we don't leave," he thought, as he finally drifted to sleep, "it will be too late for us all." They woke to a woman's wailing. "She's gone! Oh, she's gone!" Chandra was the first to reach Sulea, and she caught hold of her, embracing her without love but efficiently, as someone will perform life-saving measures for a stranger. "Calm yourself. Calm. Shh. You're dreaming." "No," said Brill. A quick look around the hovercar with its few sleepy inhabitants was enough to tell him what he feared. She's not just dreaming. Dara is gone, and Gavrilo too. Chandra stopped holding Sulea and glanced around automatically. "Oh, no," she said softly. Then, in a commanding tone, "Up, everybody, get dressed." She looked with annoyance at Sulea, who was still wailing. "And shut her up." Brill stepped forward and took Sulea into his arms. "All right," he murmured. "It will be all right." Sulea subsided into nearly inaudible sobs now, as Brill said whatever nonsense came into his head that he thought might comfort her. She raised her head from his breast after a few moments of this and looked at him through tear-filled eyes. "She's gone," she said in a tone of utter hopelessness. And it was only then that Brill understood. The parting Sulea had dreamed about and he had predicted had happened. Dara had not merely left the hovercar and all the people in it, she had also withdrawn from her mother's mind. Chandra glanced at Brill, still naked and holding Sulea. "Get dressed," she snapped, "and arm yourself. We'll need every able-bodied... You can leave her here. I don't imagine she'll be much use to us." Brill gently disengaged himself from Sulea. "Please, don't leave me." She reached out and Brill caught her hand. "All right," he said. "You can stay with me. Get yourself dressed." "Remember," said Chandra when the five of them stepped outside into the cool, early morning air, "the most powerful weapon they have against us is our own feelings. No one came into the hovercar and took Gavrilo and Dara by force. They went of their own accord. I think we all know what they felt because we have felt it ourselves. We must constantly be on guard. We must not allow ourselves to be overwhelmed. Concentrate on something else. Concentrate on..." She paused, groping. "Hate," suggested Andya. The possibility of battle made her glow. Concentrate on hating them, and there won't be room for fear or anything else. Chandra looked uneasily. That could be dangerous too, she said. I think we should try to stay rational. We want to get Gavrilo and Dara and get out. We don't want to turn into a crowd of slaughtering berserkers, which I think hating them too much could do. We don't kill them unless they try to kill us, Andya said. She twitched her shoulders. Understood, but I still think it couldn't hurt to concentrate on hating them. We'll do whatever we have to do, Chandra said. She gave them a nod, and they set off. Chandra and Andya took the lead. Brill and Suleya followed a few paces behind, and Langui Bek hung back. Brill glanced over his shoulder at him once, wondering what the man was thinking. Was he afraid that the sight of the centaurs, or if Andya was right, their scent, would knock down all his careful defenses and turn him into a zombie? Brill squeezed Suleya's hand, wishing he could give her strength for what she was going through, but he wasn't at all sure he had enough strength even for himself. It was not difficult, once they had reached the grove of trees, to pick out the figures of Gavrilo and Dara from the rest of the humans. The freshness and wholeness of their clothes gave them away at once. But despite those external differences, Gavrilo and Dara were obviously a part of the small group of humans scattered around the grove, reclining on the ground or slumped against the bole of a tree. Even from a distance, it was possible to see the changes in posture and attitude that allied their former companions with the followers of the Centaurs. As for the Centaurs, they stood as still and silent as statues among the trees. As to whether their eyes were open or closed, Brill could not tell. He dared not let himself look too closely at them. "Wait for my order," said Chandra to Andya. Brill felt weak and touched his gun. As a physician, he had always hated the idea of killing, but at that moment the gun was a comfort, anchoring him to reality and protecting him from the deadly lure of the centaurs. "Gavrilo!" Chandra called out. Then again, "Gavrilo Setsu! Do you hear me?" The human figures began to stir slightly. The centaurs remained motionless. "Gavrilo!" Brill found himself shouting with her. "Gavrilo!" And then all of them were crying out like a flock of birds. "Gavrilo! Gavrilo! Gavrilo!" "Dara?" Suleya ran forward towards the grove of trees, her arms outstretched, calling to her daughter. "Dara! Stop her!" Then they were all running. Brill quickly caught hold of Suleya, but the time for waiting was past. They all continued to run into the grove of trees, ready to face the danger head-on, ready to drag Gavrilo out forcibly, since he had no will of his own to come to them. Gavrilo was lying on the ground, his head propped up on a projecting root. His eyes were open, but they had the blank, blind gaze of the sleepwalker. Brill felt sick at the sight of his slack, uncaring face. Suleya tugged her arm from Brill's grasp, and this time he made no move to stop her. He watched as Chandra bent slightly and grasped Gavrilo by one arm. "Gavrilo," she said, "get up. It's time to go. You've got to come back to the ship with us." When he did not respond, she began tugging at him, trying to lift him to his feet. But although as entranced as the others, Gavrilo was much stronger. He did not react. He simply did not allow Chandra to raise him. "Help me with him," Chandra panted. Brill caught hold of Gavrilo's other arm. Through his sickness, he managed a mock-hearty tone. "Come on, Gavrilo, old buddy, on your feet." Between them, Chandra and Brill managed to pull Gavrilo upright. "Now walk, Gavrilo," Brill urged. "Walk, move your feet. You don't want us to have to carry you all the way, do you?" Gavrilo hung between them, a dead weight. Brill sighed and glanced at Chandra. Together they began to hoist him off the ground to better carry him when, abruptly, Gavrilo came to life. They left him tense, but before they could think of reacting, his fists were flailing and his feet kicking viciously. They were both knocked to the ground. For a moment, Brill could not move or breathe. Then he grabbed for his gun, certain Gavrilo would come at him while he was still sprawled helplessly on the ground. Had he been a soldier, Brill might have fired immediately as soon as he had Gavrilo in his sights, but Brill was not a soldier. He hesitated, and then he lowered the gun. Gavrilo stood, arms and legs spread, directly before Brill. An easy shot. He seemed to be inviting it, eager for death, and his eyes were almost alive again. Chandra got up. "Gavrilo?" Brill holstered the gun and rose to help her take hold of him again, but the other man turned and walked away from them towards one of the silent, standing centaurs. As they watched, he carefully lay down on the ground with his head close to a powerful hind leg. A twitch could stun him. An unconscious backward stop would smash his head or pulp his shoulder. "We'll tie him this time," Chandra said, reaching into her belt pouch for some cord. She winced and moved a shoulder painfully. "I didn't expect him to snap out of it like that," she said, "but now we know that they may fight back." "Something's going to happen," Languy Beck said, and with some surprise, Brill realized the man had been standing close behind him for some time. Chandra looked around, frowning. Brill felt the uneasiness. "They seem more alert," she said. "Fine time they picked for waking up, I must say. Well, be on your guard, all of you. We may have a little struggle on our hands after all." There was a scream and the sound of a gun firing, and then the unmistakable stench of burned flesh. They found Andia waving her gun around menacingly. One arm was bleeding badly. Before her, on the ground, was a decapitated body. "He came at me," Andia said to Chandra. "Jumped me with a knife. I thought these zombies were harmless, but look out!" Chandra and Brill looked around. None of the Centaur followers were moving, but they were all crouched or standing now. Even Gavrilo was sitting up, and despite their zombie-like expressions, there was now a feeling of tension and watchfulness in the air. Brill said, "Let me fix that arm." "It can wait." "Not if you intend to be of any more use to us today, it can't." "The knife?" She gestured at the ground where a short, sharp knife blade lay glinting through a covering of blood. "What were you doing?" Brill asked as he cleaned the wound and applied the anesthetic. "Well, since Sulea didn't seem to be making any headway with her brat, I thought I'd just pick her up and haul her back to the ship. I just picked her up when that one," she gestured at the ground, "came at me and shoved a knife into my arm." Brill stitched the edges of the wound neatly together. "So I dropped the brat and blasted the creature with the knife." Finished with the stitching, Brill noticed that Dara was sitting on the ground a few meters away. She did not, to Brill, look any different than she had in the days when her mind was linked with her mother's. He wondered if now she were in contact with the Centaurs, and a painful stab of longing struck him. "Hey!" Andia tweaked his ear painfully. "Let's go see what the boss wants done next. Thanks for fixing my arm." Sulea was standing in earnest conversation with Chandra and Languy when Brill and Andia approached. Chandra turned to them. "Sulea has had some communication with her daughter." Sulea looked at Brill. "I can't share what she feels or understand it, but for just a moment I felt it. She let me feel it. They're not sick, but they've found God. All they ask in life is to be close to the Centaurs, to worship them. If we try to take them away, any of them, they'll all fight us. They don't mind dying. We have the choice of leaving now or staying and joining them." I say we fight them, Andia said. Get Gavrilo away from here and he'll come back to normal. They may outnumber us, but we're stronger, with better weapons. If they all want to die, let them. And if some of us should die? Chandra asked. She shook her head. Dara also told Sulea what happened to the rest of the colonists. It was a holy war between those who felt the longing to be the followers of the Centaurs and those who felt threatened. Those who were fighting for their god found it easier to be bloodthirsty. Some of the others thought it a sickness until their patients began killing them to return to the life they had chosen. Chandra glanced at Sulea, who nodded affirmation of what she had said. So, you see, said Chandra, as Andia has said, they are many, but we are strong. Perhaps we could kill them all and recapture Gavrilo and Dara without killing them. But should we? We didn't come here to kill off the survivors of the Dawnlight colony, after all, and we have no authority to command Gavrilo and Dara to come with us if they don't wish. It's not a matter of their wishes, Andia exclaimed. They have no will now. They're sick. They can only recover if we take them away from this place. Chandra looked at Brill. Are they sick? Brill, you're our doctor. That is your decision to make. You must decide if this is a sickness we're dealing with or a religion. Unhappily, and expecting to be attacked for his trouble, Brill walked towards Gavrilo. To do so meant walking towards a centaur, and the nearness of the creature made Brill tremble and clench his teeth. They are animals, he told himself. Only animals. What I feel is not awe or worship or fear, but merely a physiological reaction. I cannot control that, but I can control my thoughts. Brill knelt beside Gavrilo, who gazed at him with empty eyes. Brill wondered what Gavrilo saw with those eyes. Above them, the sleeping centaur twitched, and a shudder passed through Gavrilo and into Brill. Gavrilo, said Brill desperately, and then could not go on. He didn't know what to say, what to do. Was Gavrilo possessed by sickness, madness, or the truth? Gavrilo's blank expression now altered, and he began to smile. That placid, knowing, archaic smile, the smile of ancient peace knowledge, the centaur's smile. Brill was blinded by tears. More than anything, he wanted to rise and fling his arms about the centaur standing above them, cling to it and stay there forever. He wanted to know the God that Gavrilo knew. Instead, Brill rose and turned and walked back to the people who waited for him. That man is not sick, Brill said to them all. We are the ones who need to be cured. That first night, back in the safe, dead emptiness of space, Brill and Sulea found what comfort they could together in the familiar motions and rhythms of sex. Brill lay awake long after Sulea fell asleep. He felt all his emotions had been cauterized, that within he was one clean wound, ready now for the healing scars to grow. On some familiar, settled world, he and Sulea would build new lives for themselves. Then he thought of Chandra, and, with a guilty start, realized that she must be alone now, brooding alone on the events of the day. He got up and went to find her. Her posture communicated a feeling of hopelessness as he had never seen in her. She did not turn when he entered, but said his name. She continued to stare out at the utter blackness that enveloped them. At last she spoke. What lies do I tell myself now? All my life I had been searching, but when I finally found what I had been searching for, I was too frightened to accept it. I turned away in terror. Do I go on telling myself lies about chemical reaction, hormonal secretions? They are gods. Must be whatever we mean by that ancient word. What power they have to evoke such love, such fear. What power to give such peace. I've seen them. I've seen what should come at the end of life, and yet I go on living. How? How do I go on living? How do I go on now? You've been listening to pre-1990s speculative fiction readings with a highlight on science fiction by Darrell T. Smith II. Please consider clicking the donation link in the description box. Thank you so much for your time and your imagination.